The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina Mackenzie.
We are going to be talking about the riveting saga of the Seabrooks of New Jersey. Here to tell us about his book called The Spinach King, The Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty. Welcome to the show, John Seabrook.
Thanks, Selina.
You're welcome. Now, I'm guessing because of your surname that you are a family member.
I am the grandson of the founder of C.F. Seabrook. That was my grandfather.
Okay, so you've grown up around spinach.
Spinach and many other vegetables. Frozen vegetables.
Yes, I'm sure. So who were the Seabrooks then? They were vegetable farmers?
My great-grandfather came from England in the 19th century, mid-19th century, and he was a small-time vegetable farmer. But my grandfather was involved at the beginning of frozen food. He was a friend of Clarence Birdseye, who was the man who invented the flash freezing process. He had invented that. He had seen fish caught above the Arctic Circle that froze in the cold air instantly, and then months later could be warmed up and tasted just as fresh as if they were just caught. So he thought, oh, maybe I can reproduce that process in a laboratory, and he did, but he couldn't figure out the vegetable part of it, which is a little more complicated than the meat part of it. And he asked my grandfather, who he knew and who was a vegetable farmer, to work on it. And so, yeah, he and his three sons figured out how to freeze vegetables for the first time, and they eventually started their own brand, Seabrook Farms, after the Second World War. And by the 50s, they froze a third of America's lima beans. They froze a sixth of America's vegetables. They were an enormous industrial processor. My grandfather not only owned the company, but he owned all the workers' housing in Seabrook, New Jersey, the company town that surrounded the plant. And he was a very autocratic, kind of old school ruler, ruled with an iron fist. And the workers basically went along with it. But unfortunately, his three sons did not go along with it. And that's where things started to go downhill.
Yeah. Is that why your father wanted to tell the story but couldn't bear to tell it? So it was over to you.
Yeah, so my father was the youngest of those three sons, and he eventually took over. My grandfather originally told him that he was going to be his successor, and he did take over the company in the 50s. He was an extraordinarily successful, dynamic, handsome ruler of the company. He had dated movie stars, including Ava Gabor, one of the Gabor sisters, but my grandfather treated him horribly. He abused him, emotionally abused him, humiliated him in boardrooms. This is not completely out of character in family businesses. Often the founder can't let go, even though he knows that he should. And that's what happened there. And so they eventually came to a complete break. The company was sold. He was disowned, but he never, and that all happened the year I was born, but he never talked about it. He never said what had happened. And he always sort of maintained that his relationship with his father had been good. And it wasn't until he died in 2009, he left me these boxes of material that showed in excruciating detail just how horrible my grandfather was. Aww. that I realized what his relationship with him had been like and why it had all fallen apart. And then I was left with, what did he want me to do with this stuff? You know, I mean, he knows I'm a writer. I'm going to write about it. Is this revenge that he's getting, 40 years later through his son against his father? I struggled with that for a long time, but I eventually did decide to write the book.
And what was your relationship like with your grandfather?
I only met him once. I came along pretty late in the day in terms of the company history. As I say, I was born the year it all fell apart. I did meet him when I was 4 years old, only time. And he was, I think, that point really far gone and maybe dementia. Or, it was a very scary encounter. He had a very unpleasant look on his face. My father took me to meet him, and maybe that was part of the unpleasant look on his face. But yeah, I came away from that with a sort of a image of my grandfather as this very scary man, and then he died a year after that. However, when he was young, I know that he was a different man, and in creating frozen vegetables, he did actually do a lot of good for the world, and that he got vegetables into people's mouths that couldn't access them before.
Yeah, very important. What about the relationship with his workers? Was he just as tough on them as he was on your father and your uncles, I guess?
Well, no, and that was the really difficult thing, because there was a sort of like official narrative that was built up around my grandfather as this wonderful humanitarian man, mainly by Japanese American workers who were released from internment camps during World War II to come and work on the farm. And then after the Second World War, hundreds of Estonians came from displaced persons camps in Europe, were sponsored by my grandfather, became American citizens, and perhaps avoided being sent to the Soviet Union and imprisoned or even killed. So to those folks, my grandfather is a savior, a humanitarian man, and they think very highly of him. And in fact, they created a museum in Seabrook, New Jersey, which is still there, in which this kind of official narrative is embedded, and my grandfather appears as a kind and caring man. And I believe, actually, for them, he maybe even did play that role. He liked the workers because they really were under his control. Not only was he their boss, he was also their landlord. So, you know, if they didn't get along with him, they might not be working there anymore. And that's the way he liked it. But with his sons, he couldn't really impose that kind of rule. And also, I think in America, maybe this is not quite as true in Europe, it's very difficult to keep family businesses going more than 2 or 3 generations, because the sons or the daughters have their own ideas. In America, we're all about, individual expression and finding your truth. And often that's not the way your father's truth went. And I think, a lot of family businesses fall apart for this reason. And mine was one of them.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the glamour. You mentioned Eva Gabor. It says here there are cameo appearances in the book with Zsa Gabor as well, and also Prince Rainier.
Yeah, there's a wonderful story in the book. So my father, he was married early in his life. He divorced. He dated movie stars in his 30s, including Eva Gabor, also Ann Miller, who was a Broadway star. But in 1956, he was invited to the wedding of Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier. He knew the Kelly family because the Kellys were builders, actually, in Philadelphia. Grace Kelly's father was a major contractor, and he built the power plant at Seabrook, which was a big brick smokestack. And so the families knew each other. And so my father was invited when Grace Kelly decided to get married in 1956. My father was invited to the wedding, and the Kellys chartered a ship, an ocean liner, to sail from New York to Monte Carlo, taking all the guests and then a number of press, including, although my father had not met her yet, my mother, who was a reporter for United Press and who had actually broken the story of Grace Kelly's engagement. And so she was invited along on the ship too. And so they met, the second night out of New York on the ship at a cocktail party. My father was immediately smitten with her. She wasn't so sure, but he won her over by, when they got to Monte Carlo, there was very little news for the press, and there were a lot of press. But my father heard this amazing story. You recall the film To Catch a Thief with Cary Grant and Grace Kelly, which had only come out the year before the wedding, in which Cary Grant plays a cat burglar in the south of France. And in fact, there was a real life cat burglar at the wedding who stole one of the guests' jewels. And the palace tried to hush it up because they knew what a sensational story that would be. But my father heard about it, and then he told my mother about it, and my mother got this extraordinary scoop, and an exclusive scoop, and was really the story of the wedding. And that, I guess, kind of helped my father get in good with my mother, and they were married about 5 months after Grace Kelly got married. And then the wedding became, the Grace Kelly wedding and their wedding were kind of linked, at least in our family history. And we saw Grace Kelly a couple times over the years, and she never really forgave my mother for that story, but she was very gracious to me. She was a lovely lady, actually.
Oh, I could imagine she was. And what happened to Seabrook Farms when it all fell apart? Did somebody else take it over, or did it just disappear?
Well, it was sold to another company. My grandfather just found this New York wholesale grocer to buy it, but they didn't know anything about frozen vegetables. I mean, the thing about the whole operation was it was all completely integrated from seed to package, all there. And they worked out this system, very complex system they called growth units, by which they could time exactly how long it would take to get from seed to package. And as I said, they grew 30 different crops, and they timed them all so that they all would ripen sequentially, so that the workers could go from one to the other and not get jammed up. But once they sold the company, the new owners didn't really have that kind of control over the production of the vegetables. And so it limped along for 15 years, but it eventually fell apart. And in 1975, it was closed. The buildings are mainly torn down, although Seabrook, New Jersey is still there, and the museum is still there. And some of the Japanese Americans who came during the war, although the parents are all gone by now, the children are still there, some of them. And I actually just went down there last weekend and spoke to them. And interestingly, while the parents, came from these hardship conditions, the children who came to Seabrook as children really loved being children there. It was a great place for children. There were lots of children, lots of space to run around. And so they have these kind of fond memories of the place, and don't really know exactly what their parents' experience was like. Like me, keep wanting to learn more, but their parents, like my parents, were quite circumspect about talking about, the darker aspects of their lives at Seabrook Farms, and just kind of wanted to keep it sunny and light. So we kind of have that in common. And it's interesting to meet with those folks, which I did last weekend now. Yeah.
You can't rewrite history, can you? The facts are the facts.
I guess you can't, but I have offered an alternative narrative of Seabrook Farms history, which I hope people will at least balance against the official narrative.
And this is your fifth book. Did you go straight into being an author then, or have you written or done anything to do with vegetables?
I write for the New Yorker in my day job, so I have written a lot of different kinds of articles over the years, and some of them actually have been about vegetables or farming or, the use of AI machines. One of the interesting things about growing vegetables is we think about mechanization. We think about how these giant wheat farms can be run by basically, one combine that's not even run by a human being. But with vegetables or fruits, there's certain aspects of the production line, the chain from seed to harvest, that humans, like strawberries, for example, it's very difficult to invent a machine that can look at a strawberry and judge it to be ripe by its color and by, the way it looks, and then pick it without damaging it. I wrote a whole article about, all the money that went into creating this AI strawberry picker that eventually they basically kind of preferred the human pickers. So a lot of this book actually is about the relationship between labor and management, and how farm labor in the United States has gone from a job that was done by Americans to increasingly a job that was done by imported migrant laborers. And now in the Trump administration, you're seeing the government trying to send back a lot of those farm laborers because they're undocumented. But farmers have survived. That's how farmers have gotten their crops picked for years and years. And without them, you can't rely on machines for some things. That's one of the things that I learned in studying my family's story, is that, they mechanized farming, and that's how they're remembered. But in fact, there were all these sort of gaps in the mechanization process that humans had to do. And it really became a question of recruiting labor and finding labor at a time when fewer and fewer people wanted to do that kind of labor.
Yeah. You mentioned lima beans earlier. I vaguely remember them from going over to America. They did the boil in the bag version, didn't they?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people were introduced to lima beans by my family, and that's quite a difficult legacy to live with. I mean, I've met a lot of lima bean eaters in promoting this book, and some love lima beans, but a lot of people's childhood was marred by having to eat lima beans.
I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to say I liked them, but I do remember them as a child.
I think over there they're not as well known. I will say the baby lima beans are actually very good. It's when they get bigger that they get very starchy. But yeah, they invented that boil in that was a Seabrook Farms invention. The bag that you plopped into the boiling water, and it was clear and you could see the product inside. And once they innovated that, then they could start making prepared food. So it wasn't just spinach; it was frozen cream spinach with butter and cream added. And then they got into prepared meals, and that was the beginning of TV dinners and all of that. So Seabrook Farms frozen cream spinach is actually still sold, not a Seabrook Farms product, but the brand still exists. And actually, I've been eating a fair amount of it as I promoted the book. It's shown up at book events, and you know what? It's actually really good. I recommend it.
Okay, well, I'll remember that for sure. Well, if our listeners want to find out more about the man that's known as the Henry Ford of agriculture, the Spinach King, the rise and fall of an American dynasty, we're selling the book right now on our website, TRE.radio. It's by John Seabrook, who we're chatting to now. And John, I know you have had 4 other books out as well. If people want to find out more about you, do you have a website?
Yeah. I made a new website for this book, which has information about my other books. It's really it's easy. It's my name, www.johnseabrook.com. And you can learn about the book and other books. There's lots of pictures there, reviews, events, videos. Yes, lots there.
There's a picture of the creamed spinach on there that does look quite nice, actually.
Like I say, it's pretty darn tasty.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing a bit of your family's history. Thank you for being on the show with us.
Thanks, Selina.
Thanks, John. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.